Welcome to the Freebirth podcast, a supportive space for people who are learning, exploring, and celebrating their autonomous choices in childbirth. Together, we'll unpack truths, share personal stories, and claim our ability to birth freely and intuitively. Here's your host, Emily Saldea.
Hey everyone, quick announcement here. In honor of all of the Freebirth babies that have been born in our new membership this past month, we are giving our complete guide to Freebirth online course away at half price through the end of the year. If you've been curious about our take on radical childbirth education, go check it out at freebirthsociety.com. This week we have Emily, a beautiful woman from New Zealand who settled with her partner in Portugal, where she now lives off the grid. Emily shares the journey of following her truth and birthing her son alone with just her partner, and the story of her daughter's birth, who was a surprise breech.
Well, so I was trying to work out when I made the decision to free birth, and it was like there were so many. I was like, oh, maybe it started here, or maybe it started at this point. But I realized that it started like way back with my parents, and it was like who I was always going to be, really. Like with my mum, she's like so naturally inclined. She always, she had all three of us like vaginal hospital births, and I was like the first posterior forceps. And my sister was like a footling breech with the nuchal cord, kind of scary things. But my mum and my dad, neither of them ever made birth seem like dangerous or scary. And my mum always said, the pain goes away as soon as the baby is born. So that sort of just like, that sort of natural mindedness from my mum. Mm-hmm. And also she's very open-minded to like new ideas. And I think that kind of rubs off on me as well.
Nice. Yeah, that makes a huge difference.
Yeah. And then from my dad, I guess, he's like, he can be quite skeptical about things, like always researching things to draw his own conclusion rather than doing what everyone else is doing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that plays a part too. And also being like quite stubborn. Well, my husband would probably say that's my most challenging trait. And I'm like, yeah, I can, I think, yeah, for sure. Just sticking with the decision to free birth, you've got to be quite stubborn, I suppose. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, totally. Yeah. Or another word we could use is committed.
Yeah, committed. That's a more PC word. Yeah. And then I've always had a passion for children. Like I always knew I wanted to have kids. Like as a teenager, I'd babysit, but then when I was 17, I became a nanny for like 4 children, later 5, and then I just developed a passion, like an intense passion for anything child related. So like I knew I didn't want to have kids straight away, but I wanted to make, the most of that time I had before I did have kids to learn as much as I could and have, those like experiences that would help me to be the parent I wanted to be. Mm-hmm. And like when my husband and I got together when we were 18, I like 18-year-old teenagers, I asked if he wanted to have kids someday. It was like, for me, it was important that I knew that we were heading in the same direction.
Of course. I wish more people talked about that on the first date.
Yeah. And, but fortunately he knew for sure that he did. He was, yeah. So it was nice to know that we had the same eventual goals, even if we both knew we didn't want them just yet. And then, yeah, later on, I guess, I worked as a nanny for another family with 4 children, and then my degree was in psychology, doing like minoring in child development and education. And then like in my spare time, I would just like browse online all about anything to do with children. It would like always catch my attention. And at some point I realized, I realized that I was confident for once I had children, but I'd never actually looked into birth itself. Mm-hmm. And so I went into that kind of, pretty open-minded. I didn't know anyone who'd ever had a home birth. So like when I went into it, I thought, induction, it seems, that seems convenient, and epidural seems like a great way to take the pain away. So I wasn't inclined one way or another, but it didn't take me long to, just studying the research and reading testimonials to come to the conclusion that I wanted to have a home water birth.
And you were figuring this out prior to your pregnancy?
Yeah. Oh, this was like probably 2 or 3 years before I got pregnant.
I love that. That's so cool.
Yeah. I still kind of feel like it was a bit weird, like just because nobody else sort of does that.
Oh, I do.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, I think that this is my hope, my prayer is that women who have not yet been pregnant or with a pregnancy that, they're going to keep or whatever, that they do start to think about this stuff years before, because you are destined to have a better birth if you give this time to marinate and to really figure out what is authentic for you. I mean, yeah, it is. I would say it is unusual for women, like you and I, but at the same time, it actually needs to be more common, because I'm very confident we will see more conscious conceptions and more intentional, women birthing in power.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I totally agree with you. Yeah.
So we can be weird together.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah, but it was still, so I wanted a home water birth, but still with a midwife. I'd never heard of Freebirth at this point. And in New Zealand, it's free. Like all birth, anything related to birth is free, whether it's in a hospital, at a birth center, at home. So I just thought, right, that's what's going to happen. And then I just kind of ignored it for, until I got pregnant, I guess. So I'll bring you to that. My first pregnancy, when was it? It was the morning after our wedding. We were just sitting down eating breakfast, and my husband asked when I wanted to start having children.
Oh my gosh, that's so cute. He's like, now that I've got you wet.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, maybe in about 12 months from now. I'd come off the pill about 6 weeks earlier, and I wanted to give my cycle just a year to regulate and fully understand my own sort of cycle. And so it would also, because I guess at the time we'd been traveling around Europe, and we'd decided to buy land in Portugal and live off grid. So we'd come home for our wedding in Fiji, and we were going back.
Wait, you got married in Fiji?
Yes, yeah.
How
so we had like our nice little, it was just like our close family and friends, about 20 of us. It was beautiful, just on the beach. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, it was perfect. And so we'd come home for the wedding, and we were only home for 2 months, and then we were going back to, basically we'd been living in our van for the past 2 or 3 years at that point. And so we had no land and no house or anything like that, but our plan was to go back and find something. Well, Portugal was the last country on our list when we'd travelled around all of Europe. And at that point, we'd always assumed we'd head back to New Zealand to settle down. And then we got to the end of our trip, and we're like, well, we're not ready to come home. We know we want to kind of live a lot more sustainably. For how we want to live, we can't really afford to do that in New Zealand. But we could have. We looked into it in Portugal, and we're like, well, we can afford to do it here. So yeah, that was it basically.
Wow, awesome.
Yeah. We were coming back here to Portugal to nothing, basically, just our van and our Labrador who had been traveling with us. And so it was about 2 weeks after our wedding that I found out we'd actually conceived the night before on our wedding night.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're like, oh, okay. So this is it was great. It was everything I'd wanted for years. It was just a year sooner than we expected. And so we went with it. It was fine. And then I think, a couple of days after I found out, I decided to join some Facebook groups about just to do with home birth. And then I stumbled onto unassisted birth, and I was like, what the hell is this? These women must be crazy. And I decided to, I decided to stay in the groups and try and, give them a chance before writing them off as, nuts. And it didn't take long. I think I was in the groups about a week or two, and I was like, yeah, no, they're not crazy at all. They're actually really highly informed and all things related to birth.
Mm-hmm.
And still at that point, it was, a home birth for me, but with a midwife. And I thought, free birth sounds great. Maybe for my third child, not for my first. So here we were in Portugal, and I knew of somebody who'd had a she had attempted a home birth with a midwife, and that ended up transferring. But that was the only person I knew in terms of like contact details for a midwife. And so I contacted her, and that was the first time I found out that it wasn't free. I just assumed it was, since I come from New Zealand.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, you have to pay money. Okay. Well, and I didn't follow it up at that point. It was still really early. I think I was only about 6 weeks when we came back to Portugal. And we were focused more at that point on looking for land,
Sure,
of course, and trying to get all of that sorted. But also unrelated to the whole free birth, I was already starting to do my own sort of self prenatal care, like just looking up the extra nutritions I needed, and taking extra vitamins and doing prenatal yoga, that sort of thing.
Nice.
And and I'd also looked up, what typically happens at prenatal appointments, and I was like, if I just purchase a few extra supplies,
right,
and I can pretty much do this myself. So I think,
and that's the thing with this, quote unquote prenatal care. Like, wouldn't it be wonderful if prenatal care with a midwife or God forbid a doctor actually felt like this nourishing, relaxed space with a woman, with a wise woman who's familiar with birth, who, can answer your questions and help you build your confidence. And, I know some midwives are like that. And it's sad that is not the norm, because that's prenatal care. Of course, in my mind, it's not tests that you could ultimately do by yourself.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And I don't think I said that this midwife that I'd been given the details for was a man. And I know something just didn't
sit right. You should
sit
see
right.
my face right now.
Yeah.
No, that's a hard no for me.
Yeah. And so it just didn't sit right with me. And I was trying to be, open-minded, to be like, Portugal's quite a traditional country. If this is a male midwife, maybe he's quite, open-minded too. So I should, but it still wasn't something I was going straight into, and I wasn't rushing to get into contact with him. When I was around 14 weeks, we went and had an ultrasound done. It was it wasn't easy process. I thought it was quite simple. We book an appointment, but eventually we figured out how to do all of that, because we're navigating the language barrier as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So neither of you speak the language?
No, even now, we've been here 3 years, and we speak. I guess all of our friends are foreigners as well, so we don't have to speak Portuguese. We know like some basics, maybe 100 words all up, but not enough to converse.
That doesn't feel like the easiest language either for someone whose English is their first.
Yeah, no, it's I think it's a lot more challenging than like Spanish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree. Okay, so you're in this country where you don't speak the language. You're trying to find land to buy. You're trying to figure out, who's going to be with you at your impending birth. You go get an ultrasound. And what was the impetus for the ultrasound?
Well, I hadn't really heard anything. I didn't know that ultrasound wasn't, something that everyone does. To me, it was just ticking the boxes. I was like, right, I'm going to take charge of this, go do my own ultrasound. It was, so I went in there prepared. I was looking up, what do I have to do in preparation for an ultrasound? And I'd seen something about, making sure you have a full bladder, because it makes it easier for them to see. So I went in there with this full bladder, and I didn't really like the whole experience. I found them quite rude. Like at first I assumed that they just didn't speak English because they just kept speaking to each other. There were two people in there, to each other in Portuguese. But then she said something like, "Oh, you have a really full bladder." I was like, "Yeah," thinking, "Yeah, I'm going to get some praise for being prepared." And she was like, "Yeah, you shouldn't have done that." I was like, "Oh."
Rude.
Yeah. And then they didn't really speak to us at all unless I like made the effort to make cut into what they were saying to ask a question. And I'd also seen, because I was 14 weeks, and I'd seen at that point they only do external ultrasounds. And so I got a real surprise when they just put it straight inside me for an internal ultrasound. I was like, oh, okay. That was unexpected. But that was the only ultrasound we had. To me, it just ticked the boxes of, yes, there's just one baby, and this is where the placenta is, that sort of thing.
Which, of course, I need to say to anyone listening, the placenta, position doesn't matter at that time, because it will change, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So then how was the rest of that pregnancy and birth?
Where do I go from here? I guess
tell me kind of like what you wound up deciding for your birth team. Did you find a midwife, or what did that look like?
Yeah, so I was looking more into Freebirth and knowing it was definitely something I wanted to do. I was a bit nervous about telling my husband. At some point he asked when we'd be meeting with the midwife, and I told him I wanted to do it by ourselves. He wasn't keen on the idea for our first child. And from his point of view, he trusted me and he trusted my body and knew I could take care of the baby. But he wanted someone there for him, I guess, in case something happened to me. He didn't want the responsibility, I guess, in case, suddenly I bled out, and he was just, I don't know what to do.
It's funny that so many people think that the first baby, it's like you have to prove to the partner or to the family or to the doctor or to yourself, you have to prove that you can birth without an emergency to give yourself permission. I hear that all the time. It's an interesting way of thinking about birth, that the first one, it's not unique to you guys at all. It's extremely common that, we'll just have the first one in the hospital and the second can be at home, or the first with a midwife and the second can be freeborn. It's so interesting, this we have to prove, but it also comes with a true lack of understanding of how unique birth is, right? Because it could, the first birth could be totally different than the second birth or the third.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting.
You could have a totally normal first birth, and then second birth it doesn't go quite so well. But it's not like it sets the stage for
exactly
things to come. So
what'd you wind up deciding?
So what we decided to do, he asked me to just seriously look around for somebody else, like a midwife or even just a doula, or just someone for him to call if he felt we needed it. So not someone that we'd definitely have, but just in case he was like, oh, I'm feeling out of my depth here, I'm going to call this person.
Well, that makes sense.
Exactly.
Because that's what this is about, right? Ideally, we would all be birthing in community where we didn't have to find some random stranger to be able to call. Ideally, birth would be so normalized out of hospital that, of course, you'd have a team or a community of people who could be present should you want it, or could answer questions.
That's totally exactly. Yeah. And I really love, when I'm thinking back on it, just he never ever suggested that we'd go to a hospital or anything like that. It was always going to be a home birth. So I'm really glad about that. I looked around for more. I found a female midwife who was maybe 2 hours away, but I couldn't find any contact details or testimonials for her. And then I found something similar to Ina May Gaskin's farm in Spain. But it was probably maybe an 8-hour drive away. And I was in touch with a midwife there, and she was happy to come and stay. But knowing that, knowing how the time frame for birth, it could be anything from 36 or 43 plus. I was like, I don't know if, we also didn't have a setup for her to stay. So it's not like we were just living in our van. We didn't really have anywhere for her to stay if she'd come for that. I couldn't find any doulas. I found a mother who was wanting to become a doula, and she was kind of open to the idea of attending, but I think, oh no, yeah, she ended up putting me in touch with somebody else who'd had a free birth. And this person, her husband had been in this exact same position as mine, just wanting somebody to call if they needed it.
Sure.
And so she gave me the details for this midwife, another male midwife. And but he was a lot cheaper than the first one I'd heard about. So I thought, okay, well, it's a lot cheaper if we have to call him, then, we're not spending too much. We didn't end up using this midwife. I got in touch with him and I really did not like him at all. He was insisting on things like, what is it? An ultrasound, at this point I was about 36, 37 weeks. And he also had a very high transfer rate. So we didn't end up,
it's like, okay, guy, you're obviously not what I need. Thanks.
No. Yeah. So I think, 37 weeks. And my husband just said to me one day, do you think you can do this all on your own if I'm not even there? I was like, oh yeah, for sure. I'd been, envisioning it in my head for months. So I knew what I was doing. And he was like, okay, fine, let's do it then. And so he was happy for us to free birth. And I'd mentioned it to our families and they weren't keen on the idea. So we just let them believe we were still going to have a midwife. And then I guess, when was it? I was 38 weeks and 6 days. Yeah, the day before I was 39 weeks. And I had Braxton Hicks all day and I was just in a really grouchy mood. I was just, I had to keep going to the toilet and emptying my bowels. It was it was a rainy day and the toilet was outside and I was just really not happy. And I thought, I've still got weeks to go, First births typically are maybe around 41 weeks. I was like, oh, I have to put up with this for so much longer. And then I think around later on in the evening, around 7 p.m, I think, I noticed the contractions where I could actually time them. And I thought, oh, maybe this is actually happening. But they were really irregular. They could be anything from 2 to 7 minutes apart and really long. They could be 20 seconds or 70 seconds. It was really, really different. And so I decided to get everything set up. And my husband was like, oh, we're having the baby. And I said, oh, maybe, but just in case everything's all set up for us. And we went to bed, we watched a movie, and then I think, we decided to sleep. I was still timing the contractions, but they were irregular. And then around 1 a.m, I hadn't really slept. I dozed for a few seconds and that was about it. Around 1 a.m, I woke my husband and said, right, I'm getting way too uncomfortable to stay in bed. Maybe start filling up the pool. So I had him fill up the pool. It wasn't a quick job. We thought it would take an hour or two because we don't have any electricity or running water or anything like that. So he
What time of year was this?
This was March, so it was spring.
Okay.
It was, we'd had some warm weather, so I'd been hoping that we could birth outside, but it was cold and rainy that day. So we had the birthing pool set up in the awning and he was just filling up the water in there, boiling it on the stove in the caravan and then taking it out into the pool. And it ended up taking about 5 hours, I think, just to get it warm enough for me to get into. And it didn't end up, it didn't matter so much that it took so long because I was still just kneeling. I was kneeling on the ground, hugging my Swiss bull, had a big blanket over me and just getting through them. I wasn't sure where I was. They were still irregular and I just kept telling myself, yes, this is hard, but irregular contractions, that just means that it's still early labor. So even though I couldn't stand or talk through them, I kept trying to tell myself it was still early labor. And it wasn't until, I got to a point where I was like, this is really hard. I can't do this. Maybe we should go to the hospital. And then I vomited and I was like, okay, no, cool. So this is transition. It's cool. And then I had a push and I hadn't realized how different contractions and pushing were. This was just vomiting out of my vagina, basically. And I was like, what was that? And then I lost my mucus plug, and I was like, oh, okay, great. Things are finally happening. Pushing has started. It'll be like an hour, maybe 2 tops, because that's what I'd read in preparation. And by this time, the pool was warm enough for me to get into. So I got in, and my husband kept boiling water to maintain the heat, and it was still hours, and I felt in for the baby, and there was just nothing, and I kept thinking, why is this taking so long? At some point I felt something come out, and it was the amniotic sac, and I was like, oh, okay, cool, things are slowly happening, that's fine. But this was exhausting. It wasn't painful. I didn't mind the pushing. I didn't find it hard. I just found it really tiring. And so when was it? I think, it was about 4.5 hours after the pushing started that his head was finally, starting to come out. And that took so long. Like when I read, it took me, 2 or 3 pushes and the head was out. It took me maybe an hour from when I first started feeling it to it finally coming out. And I yelled out to my husband, the head's out. And he came and sat down right next to me. And then the body followed like a few seconds later. And I pulled.
It was just the 2 of you?
Yeah, it was just the 2 of us. We had our dogs as well. And
nice.
So it's just us. And so I pulled the baby up, and I realized I'd pulled it up. I'd wanted to check for a nuchal cord first, and I couldn't get him much closer to me. So I had to get my husband to help unwrap the cord. It was around his neck twice. And then, once he'd done that, the baby was on my chest, and he was, screaming, and we saw that we had a boy. That was, it was so perfect. It was, and that was my first birth. I guess, the only thing after that was that the placenta then took a couple of hours to come out.
How many?
It was only 2.5.
Oh, that's what mine was.
Oh, right, yeah. And it came out after I went to the toilet, and I was like, okay, no, that's fine. That's no problem. And it was all whole and intact, and then I had no tearing or anything like that. It was great. Yeah, we did it. It was our first baby, and we've done this.
Beautiful. And how did your husband do, since he was nervous? How was he during the actual birth?
He was honestly perfect. He didn't have any anxiety at all. He was just really chilled out, just filling up the pool and messaging our family back home to keep them updated. He wasn't panicky at all. And
I hope it's that's what I hear and see so often, is these men being nervous, understandably, that this is not the norm and in the way that we were raised. But then when the labor actually drops in, I really think the vast majority of men do know how to, and it's just very natural to just relax into it, and to see that this is not the crazy, scary, thing that has been painted for them. And so it's nice to hear that, because I think that's very common, that, there's this anxiety leading up to it, kind of feeling like you need to prepare for every horrible thing. And then labor unfolds normal and naturally, and the men are great, and they're solid, and they're wonderful support.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I remember he asked if I think he had music on at some point, and I asked him to turn it off, and he asked if I wanted him to hold my hand, and I didn't. I just didn't want to be touched or hear anything, and he was so good. Didn't touch me, just stayed quiet. I found if I couldn't see him, I started to panic because I didn't want him to miss anything. But if he was there but not looking at me, it would make me a bit nervous if he was staring at me. But if he wasn't, if he was just chilled out and I could see him on his phone, then I was like, yep, everything's good, everything is smooth, this is going well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you got the free birth that you were envisioning.
Exactly. Yeah. It was exactly what I wanted, and it was so perfect.
Beautiful. Yeah. I guess when we had scheduled this, I didn't realize that your first birth was a free birth. I thought it was just your second.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, it was both of them. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So cool. Okay. So then, yeah, how was your postpartum? And then take me into this next pregnancy, and how far apart were they?
Right. So postpartum it was pretty good, I suppose. I found breastfeeding really hard, only because it I just listened to your lactation one this morning, and I found breastfeeding really painful, and but it was only really painful on one side. And I was, messaging with family and friends and on Facebook groups, and people were giving me advice like, "Oh, change the way you're holding the baby, or check
Mm-hmm.
check the way they're latched on, or look for a tie," and those sort of things. And none of them seemed to help, like changing the latch or the hold. But it was only ever painful for like 10-15 seconds, and then it would just like slowly dissipate, and after like a minute it was fine. And it was always the same like that, but it wouldn't be every time. And it faded away after like 5 weeks. On my left side it was just all gone, that sort of pain. And on my right side I think it took 3 weeks. And I was like, oh well, that was just sort of a strange thing. And it wasn't until I was 14 months postpartum and my cycle returned and I experienced the same pain again, and I realized, oh, it was actually hormones. That
Mm.
I was like, oh, so that's why it hurt. And the same sort of thing when I got pregnant this second time in the first trimester, I guess it hurt a little bit as well when I
Mm-hmm.
was nursing my son.
Totally.
I was like, oh, right, so it's the hormones that have caused this.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
remember it was my first pregnancy that I had my daughter with, and I remember um, my nipples in the first trimester. Like, even if, and I do not have sensitive nipples, which turned out to be great for for breastfeeding. But
Yeah.
even if in the beginning, if the sheet on my bed even grazed my nipples, I would be like, ah, what is that? It was
Oh,
so
wow.
intense. So yeah, I can't imagine breastfeeding while you're going through that.
Yeah. Oh, ouch. Yeah. Oh, yeah. But fortunately, by the time he was a month old, it was all normal and fine, and had
Hmm.
no problems after that. Um, and I think the hardest part I actually found postpartum was having people around. Like, I guess a lot of people have come onto your show and talked about how they needed a good support network. And
Hmm.
like, I love having visitors over, and I love showing them off. But for me and for my husband as well, it like exhausts us whenever we have company.
Hmm.
So we just really need that sort of space to just be us, I guess, to do what we're doing and get to know the baby and that sort of thing. Um, so I guess the second, yeah, so my cycle returned when he was 14 months postpartum. And then, yeah, we started trying a couple of months after that. And because we'd gotten pregnant like straight away with my son, we assumed it would be the same the second
Sure.
time around.
Hmm.
And so I was quite surprised that, that I didn't get pregnant that first month. Like, oh, what a surprise.
Hmm.
Um, and then it ended up taking us 6 months. But I guess it was kind of good because I had newfound respect for people who, struggle to fall pregnant, and, for the ignorant comments that people have experienced in miscarriage or infertility or just don't want to have kids, that they have to put up with. Because I know each month I'll be like, oh no, is there something wrong with me? Or do I have secondary infertility? But yeah, obviously it was fine in the end. Got pregnant in that 6 month. And I found out a week before our 10-year anniversary. So I waited a week before telling my husband, and then I baked like a big cookie, and it said,
Aw.
what does it say, baby number 2 on it, and my son gave it to my husband as like a
That's
wedding
cute.
anniversary gift. Yeah. Not wedding anniversary, first date. Yeah.
Hmm. Cute.
Um,
So how was that
so
pregnancy with a toddler?
it wasn't so bad. I think my pregnancies were very similar, pretty easy. Like, I never experienced any sickness in either of them. I had I was just hungry. Both pregnancies I was like extra hungry. And I think the hardest part was my nursing aversion. So I really wanted
Hmm.
to keep breastfeeding my son, and I still am. He's now 2 years 8 months old, and we're still going, maybe like once every couple of days. But it was, those last 4 months of pregnancy were so hard to get through because I just couldn't stand it whenever he latched on. And it just made me feel so guilty because he really wanted it. And yeah, it was tough. To me, that was the hardest part.
Totally. Yeah, that's a big thing.
I think, and one of the best parts is probably like where we are here in Portugal. We've now made quite a lot of friends, all foreigners from, different backgrounds, really diverse ages as well. And different countries, and everyone is so supportive of Freebirth. Like,
wow.
I have not had to put up with any sort of negativity. Everyone's like so positive and excited for me, and I love that. Like,
wow,
just
that's huge.
Yeah,
I experienced that in Maui, and was very grateful for that because I went there when I was super pregnant, and everyone I told and everyone I talked to, it was just not a big deal. I got no fear mongering. I got some confusion. Like I remember one waitress from Brazil asked me when I would be induced. And I was like, why don't you sit down? Why don't you sit down and let me tell you about what's about to happen?
I shall enlighten you now. Yeah,
exactly. That's awesome. So good to know about Portugal, about the culture there.
Yeah. I think it's just more of this like foreigners, like this community we have. Everyone's like, really independent thinking, sort of open to new ideas. And I really love that. Like not having to put up with people asking me about like doctor's appointments and things like that.
Well, and so much of it too is, the lifestyle you've chosen attracts those kind of people, right? So like, you're hippies living on a farm in a motorhome in a foreign country. Like, of course, the people you're going to attract are like-minded in that way. Versus if you were maybe, like some women who free birth are, still living in the small town they grew up in a conservative, part of a, let's say the Midwest of America. And it's like, well, of course, then that's going to be different. But same thing with me, because I moved around so much. It's like when you move to a new place and you intentionally create your new community, of course, the people you'll attract are totally into it.
Yeah. Oh, I love to hear that because we're moving back to New Zealand next year, and like to live and to like set up this lifestyle in New Zealand. And I've been so not looking forward to leaving the community behind. But you saying that, I'm like, oh yeah, we'll probably, be able to create.
Of course you will.
Ourselves, yeah.
Absolutely. And it's just your energy field. Like you are going to attract. Obviously, you're not going to become friends with someone who's like, oh my God, you did what? Your baby could have died, blah, blah, blah. Like that's just not, then you're gonna be like, cool, we're not going to probably hang out again. Right. Like,
yeah.
It sucks making friends as adults because it takes so much effort, and, moving to a new place and building community, of course, is a lot of effort. But at the same time, it does give this freedom of newness, and that you do get to filter through because you don't have the history, right? Like if someone's lived in the same place for so long, there's history and family roots there in a way that, is different. You kind of have to take the whole thing versus, moving and restarting. Yeah, you absolutely will attract the right people.
Yeah. It's nice to know that we'll be able to find something else, I suppose.
So take me to this little one's birth, which at the time of this recording was just shy of 6 weeks ago.
Yeah. So when I had my son at 39 weeks, and I had been expecting that I would have the second baby at around the same point, possibly sooner. So I'd been so prepared for this baby from like 37 weeks. And she came around 41 weeks. I was just so surprised that, well, why could I be wrong? I just thought she'd be coming earlier. But yeah, it was fine. It was I had so many Braxton Hicks regularly, but I think from about 34 weeks, I'd have like a handful a day, and I just got so used to just ignoring them. And I guess, just before 41 weeks, I was just like, I was just out doing, I think I was doing the dishes or the laundry or something. I was like, hey, I think I've had a few Braxton Hicks, like just quite close together in the last, little while. Maybe I'll start timing them. This is at like 6 o'clock at night. I was about to start cooking dinner. My husband was outside playing with our son. And then, it took about half an hour while I was cooking dinner to be like, yeah, these are pretty regular. These are like spot on every 5 minutes. I'm going to go let my husband know. So he started getting the pool ready. Like he'd already pumped it up, but just to pump it up a bit more and set out a place outside. You know, got some fairy lights, and my son and I had some dinner, and we danced together and played with his cars. And yeah, it was really quite magical, I suppose. It had been like a really cold, windy day, but then the wind had just like died down. So it was still cold, but like still fun to be outside. And then I think around 8 o'clock, my son asked to go to bed. So I nursed him to sleep, and I was just like holding him going, this will be the last time I nurse you as an only child.
Oh, did you cry?
No, I sort of like taking a photo, but it was dark and I didn't want to put the flash on and wake him up. And so I came out, and my husband set up like a movie for us to watch just outside in our awning, right in front of the pool where I was going to have the baby. And I was walking around, just walking through the contractions. They were just steadily getting stronger and stronger, and I couldn't never tell with the second birth when I went from like early labor to active labor. It wasn't like distinct. It just like was a gradual sort of steady strengthening, I suppose. And then around 9 o'clock, I walked away from the movie to like have a contraction, and then like my water just broke and like splashed all over the ground, and I was like, oh, okay. I looked at my husband and we both laughed, like, that was weird. What a strange sensation.
Right.
Because I'd never had that with my son, and it was like, oh, okay. And he gave me like a towel to dry myself off, but then it kept like trickling down. I was like, well, this is quite useless. I'll just leave it like it is. He had like a fire going, so I was just standing next to the fire to keep warm, and I asked him to start filling up the pool now. And so I just kept watching the movie and standing next to the fire, and then I was walking away and like staring up at the stars during each contraction, and I was starting to like imagine. I'd heard people on your podcast, I think, talk about how they just envision themselves like opening up to let the baby out. So I was doing that during the contractions, and also telling myself I can do anything for 60 seconds. And it was it really helped. I don't think any of my contractions were longer than maybe 45 seconds. It was so it was bearable. And I kept really wanting transition. I was like, I just want to get to transition. I want to reach that point where I want to give up, because then I know
you and every woman in labor.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, is it hard enough yet? Well, it's hard, but I don't think it's too hard. Okay. And then I reached a point, I think, where I couldn't really walk through them anymore. I was just like kneeling on the ground during them. And I was like, oh, this is, I don't want to keep walking. And my husband asked if I wanted something to lean on. I was like, no, I'm getting in the pool now. I think it was around 10:30. And I can't remember if it was just before I got in the pool or just after, but I remember I was kneeling down, and I felt like a strange movement, and I was like, oh, what was that? Like, at first I thought, oh, the baby's changed positions, but I thought, no, it hasn't, because it wasn't a significant movement. And then I forgot about it. So I was in the pool. Oh, I forgot to say that I had noticed meconium leaking around, I think it was around 9:30, about half an hour after my water broke, because I checked it right after, and everything was all clear. And then I checked again around 9:30, and it was dark, and I was like, oh, okay, that's fresh. I went and grabbed my fetoscope to check the heart rate, and I was, listening really carefully, and it was still strong and steady. I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, no, the baby's not in distress. We're all good. And so then I got into the pool, and it was just, it felt so good. I think I fell asleep. It felt so amazing. It was like 10 minutes at least, I think, of just nothing, like no contractions or anything. And it was so relaxing. And then they started up again so much stronger. I was like, oh, okay, so that was giving me a break before it got, and I was like, oh,
Smart.
This is really hard. I don't want to do this. And I was like, okay, yes, I've reached transition. I don't want to do this anymore. And I think I had another 2 or 3, and it was a weird sensation. Like, it was like a contraction and a push at the same time. And I was like, what is this? What's happening? What phase am I at right now? And then I felt down and I could feel something, and it felt soft. And I thought, oh, this kind of feels like the amniotic sac did with my first son, that burst. So it can't be that.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just kind of like bulged out a bit more. And I was like, okay, is this part of my own body? Am I swelling up? And but nothing felt wrong, or it didn't feel painful. I was like, well, I don't think it's that. It doesn't feel like a head. It's like quite soft. But yeah, I decided I just like kind of ignored it and kept going, and was like,
what else
right,
can
well, I
you
can't
do, really?
exactly. I was like, I can't do anything. I'm just going to go with it. And then I felt it come out, and I was about to yell out to my husband, the head's out. And then I reached down, I was like, this is definitely not a head. And I could not figure out what it was. And like a second later, like legs and arms came out too. And I was like, oh wow, it's Breech. Okay, when did that happen? Like I checked the baby's position, and it was head down. So what?
Sneaky little baby.
I know. Yeah, so I was in total shock, but not.
So you had been feeling the little butt?
I'd been feeling the bum. Like I'd even wondered, is the head inside there somewhere? But
Wow.
yeah, it was it was like I wasn't panicked or anything. Somebody asked me later, they're like, "Oh, but you must have started to freak out." I was like, "No, I guess it was." You get into that mode where you're like fight or flight. You've got to, there's no sort of time to panic.
Exactly. And it's, well, I would actually maybe even say it's not fight or flight. It's like deep presence. It's deep maternal instinct where, you're just in it. And also I will add that surprise breaches are chill because they're surprised. So by the time, for most stories that I hear, by the time you realize it's breech, it's at emergence. So what are you going to do? It actually doesn't make any logical sense to panic, right? You have to birth your baby. You have work to do.
Yeah.
So the arms is to walk me through the actual emergence.
Yeah. So I'm there. I can feel like the legs and the arms, and I knew straight away that the baby was going to come out quickly. Like I'd already told my husband, this is going to be a faster labor. I can just feel it. Everything's moving, progressing faster. And then, that time in the pool, I'd only been in the pool less than half an hour, and I could just feel, everything's just going so fast. So I just knew that the baby was going to come out, and I thought of telling my husband, but I didn't want to panic him, because I also did not want to go into depth to explain it to him, because I was, I had a baby half out of me. And so I just wanted to focus. I was like, right, I've just got to let go of any sort of fear of tearing, allow my body to just like get this head out quickly. And I just naturally sort of like went in the pool. Like I went into the center of the pool, like in an upright position, kind of like, I guess, in a half squat, half kneel. And I had my hand just like tentatively, I guess, pressed up against the bum, and my other hand was feeling for where the head was. And then the next push, the head came out like literally all in one go. It was like, oh my gosh, I did not expect that all to come out in one go. And yeah, I just yelled out to my husband, it's out. He had not expected that. He was sitting just, a meter or two away in front of the fire and like jumped up. So, he was so excited. He like grabbed his phone and came over, and we checked the baby, and we did like the, what's it called? Where you test we did the APGAR test, and everything was all good. And like,
so wait, you mean you guys just did your own APGAR test?
Yeah.
Just, by essentially assessing the baby, or did you have like a little scorecard, or what did that look like?
He had like a piece of paper and a pencil, and he was like, okay, how's I can't remember what they are. How's the breather?
Gotcha. Gotcha.
So, ticked it all off. Oh, I forgot to say, because there'd been meconium, I'd been telling myself, right, just in case the baby, it inhales it. I wasn't worried about it at all since the baby was born in the water, but I just wanted to make sure there was none on its face. And with my son, since he'd had the cord around his neck, I wanted to check for that before I brought the baby to the surface. So I I turned the baby over with its back up, and there was no nuchal cord, and I had its back up, like, so just in case there was any meconium around its face, it would drip down into the water rather than into its mouth, I guess. But there was nothing. And as soon as it was out of the water, it was screaming. And my husband was asking me, what is it? What is it? And I asked him to go and get our son. And so he woke up our son so we could all see together. And
Aww.
we saw that it was a little girl. And it was,
crazy. So she flipped towards the end of the labor, it sounds like.
Yeah. So I guess it was like at that point where I said I could feel the sensation, like the baby had changed positions. So
exactly.
I'd say it was in that last half an hour.
That's awesome.
I've been thinking about it, and like with my son, he hardly ever changed positions like right throughout. He was just like same position all through pregnancy. With my daughter, she changed quite a bit. She'd often go like posterior, transverse, back down, head down, anterior. And then with her coming up breech, I wondered if it had something to do with like where my placenta was. I don't know exactly where it was. I just know it was obviously in a good place. But I wondered if that was, making her uncomfortable or, stopping her from coming out.
Well, they definitely, they have wisdom that we will never understand. They work in mysterious ways. So then how was the birth of your placenta and your immediate postpartum? Did she come out vigorous and crying, or was she a slower to start? What was that like?
She cried so much. Like my son had like just cried when he was first born, and then he was like really chilled, and she was just crying and crying unless she was latched on. She just wanted to nurse. I was like, okay, this is fine as long as she's nursing. With my son, we'd burnt the cord, and with my daughter we were going to do the same thing, but with her screaming, it was. And once I got out of the pool and was all wrapped up in towels and blankets, it was just, we couldn't find like a clear piece of the umbilical cord. I was like, no, we'll just cut it. So we cut it, and my husband held her so I could go to the toilet, and I expected the placenta to come out like it had the first time, but it didn't. And it ended up taking 5 hours after. And it was like, we went to bed, and so I was like snuggled up. I had like my toddler on one side and the baby on the other. I was like, I don't want to go to sleep until I've like birthed the placenta. Like I just didn't feel comfortable. And I had like the baby who just wanted to keep nursing, and I had like my toddler who I'd get like one of them quiet and the other one would like wake up. And I just wish, like looking back, I think that was like my only regret. There was that I wish I'd stayed up until I birthed the placenta, just to make myself more relaxed. Because I realized because I keep going out. I think I went in maybe like 3 or 4 times to empty my bladder, and I was like, no, I've always got a crying baby or toddler in the background, so I need to be fully relaxed. So I need to quieten them before I can get this out. And then once they were both asleep, it was I got it out and it was all fine. And that was it.
Beautiful. Wow, those are some badass stories.
I really like, I've had both births have been like in optimal conditions. Like I've never experienced anything else. And I'm like, birth is hard. Like I couldn't imagine having to do that with like somebody telling me what to do or trying to touch me or like having lights on or noise or having to go in a car or
I know, and that's what we always that's what we always say and think about is any woman who is able to have a vaginal birth, in captivity is amazing. I mean, what an extraordinary testament to the power of women and the power of our bodies and the strength of, of physiological birth, with all conditions trying to combat that essentially. It's really, that's what I always say to women who have, who want to birth out of the hospital, but their first or however many births happen in the hospital. It's like you're going to be better at it than anybody else because you've already done it under essentially like in a battle,
Yes.
And so now you're going to get to do it like your stories where it's just totally mother-led and, in your own flow and in your own home and with just the people who know you intimately. Like you've got this in the bag.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Awesome. How
Yeah.
beautiful. I love it. And that was such a nice surprise to not realize your first was a free birth. That's awesome.
Okay,
I'm
yeah.
real glad you didn't have a male midwife there.
I know. And like now that we've done it, like my husband and I were both like, it would just be so strange to have another person there, even if they were just sitting in like the corner and like leaving us alone. It would just change the dynamics. Like we've got like our relationship as husband and wife that, you know, this is such an intimate sort of thing, and to have anyone else there, it would just be strange.
I mean, it's like hiring someone to sit in the corner while you have sex.
Right? Yeah.
You know, like obviously, culture says that this is so dangerous and that you need all this assistance. And so I think that's a stretch for many people, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's such intimate energy, and it is sexual energy, and it does feel strange to have strangers there.
Yes, yeah. And like, see, because we'll be going back to New Zealand next year, and midwives are free there. And we hope to have like maybe 2 more children, but I still want to free birth. I don't particularly want a midwife there, even though they are free.
I would argue that maybe they are monetarily free, but there is a huge cost to them, because you are accepting a free service that comes with a tremendous amount of limitation.
Yes.
So what's the point? I mean, unless you want to play that game.
Yeah, like because what is it? They're confined, I guess, to liability issues and things like that.
Yeah.
Like I always think of like with my first, like so many people have said to me, "Oh, you're lucky you have easy births," or you're lucky everything went really smoothly. I'm like, well, both of my births would have been considered like complications. Like the first one, 4.5 hours of pushing, no one's going to let you do that.
And the placenta.
And the placenta for both of them. And I think for the first one also, like having irregular contractions right through. I know people are usually, their labours are augmented to when that happens. And then the second one, the meconium, and then the breech presentation. I'm like, no, they would have been considered complications.
Right. And the luck thing is so annoying, because I mean, you have to actually subscribe to the concept of luck, first of all, which I don't know if I do, but also then that's like saying you're lucky that you didn't get hit by a car when you went to the grocery store. You're lucky that when you got out of bed, you didn't, pull a muscle. You're lucky that you didn't choke when you ate your dinner. Like, come on, like we're not doing that to every other potential, thing. It's just so speaks to the way that we've pathologized birth, that when a birth goes well, you're lucky. Whereas the truth is, birth is literally meant to go well. It wouldn't make any sense that, we have, how many billions of years of, wisdom in our DNA and in our cells. It actually really is a way to deplatform your story and to take away from the truth of your births, which is that I wouldn't say you're lucky. I would say that you created an environment for the mammalian birth sequence to unfold as it is intended to, which is for your baby to survive, for you to survive in an optimal setting. And you did that, and yes, not all babies, do survive in all mammalian species. And that's horribly tragic, of course, but the truth remains that it is meant to function and work, and it does in the vast majority of births.
Oh, absolutely. Like to me, it's just doing the physiological process, like not messing with it, keeping everything undisturbed, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm excited to share this, and just totally badass stories. I love it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I was really happy to be on here.
That's it for today, everyone. Join us next week for another episode of the Freebirth podcast. Thanks for joining us, and remember, your body, your choice. Lots of love.